And we're off. We have our first candidate for Michigan's soon-to-be-open Senate seat, and she's hoping to make the leap to Washington all the way from Lansing. A conversation this morning with State Senator Mallory McMorrow. Liberation Day. Whether the president's efforts to make Americans wealthy again work or not, they've already made some Americans nervous again. We'll break down how tariffs might affect Detroit's automakers and what you should do if you have investments tied to the stock market. It's Sunday, April 6th, and this is Flashpoint. Good Sunday morning, everybody. I'm Jason Colthorpe. The president's tariffs went global this week, and it has many economists' heads spinning. First, to understand the math that was used to come up with other countries' tariffs to the USA, and second, to understand what the end game is here. The Economist this week labeled the president's reasoning as diluted, its word, in a scathing editorial that called the Trump tariffs, quote, the most profound, harmful, and unnecessary economic error in the modern era. This morning, we're breaking down what it means for Detroit's automakers with our auto and supply chain analysts, and why a couple of the president's critics agree with the auto tariffs. Also, we did finally get a U.S. Senate candidate this week, more than 2 months now after Gary Peters announced he's not seeking re-election. Democrat Mallory McMorrow has served in both chambers of the Michigan legislature, and she's ready to graduate to the big stage. Can she do what Peters, Debbie Stabenow, and Alyssa Slotkin did not do, and that's skip the step of serving in the U.S. House of Representatives first? Let's ask her right now on Flashpoint. State Senator Mallory McMorrow joining us on Flashpoint. Good to see you. We always appreciate your time. Let me start this morning with the simple question: why the U.S. Senate? Why not governor of Michigan, or maybe a U.S. Congress seat that might open up?
Look, this is a chaotic time for our country and in the state. We are seeing the horrendous impacts of Donald Trump's tariffs being unleashed on Michigan this morning. And I know people are concerned about their retirement funds, their housing plans. This is the moment for new leadership in the U.S. Senate, and I am laying out a very clear plan for a new American dream that consists of 3 things: success, safety, and most importantly, sanity in this moment. I think I am the right person for this moment. We've had a tremendous response, and I'm excited to hit the road and meet people all across the state.
You mentioned the president's tariffs, which obviously saw a lot of worldwide reaction this week. If you were to become a senator, what would your pushback be on that, considering also that some Sean Fain, Debbie Dingell have said if it brings more jobs to Michigan, they're in favor of it?
So look, there's a difference between a smart tariff policy within the auto industry that helps our state better compete with the likes of China, who've become very aggressive in the automotive industry. If there are really targeted tariffs that can bring some of these shifts at plants back online, that's a good thing. But then what Donald Trump went and did was announce sweeping tariffs on products that impact our everyday lives: bananas, coffee, food, clothing, electronics. There is a real fear in Michigan that if people cannot afford basic everyday goods, then they're going to shop less. That's going to impact the sales tax. That's going to negatively impact our schools. It is a domino effect that we simply can't afford.
We've talked on this show this week specifically about what it does to the auto industry. If you were to become senator, Democrats still in the minority, or at least at the moment, what do you think you'd be able to do as a member of the Senate to preserve what Michigan's auto jobs, one of every 5, is dependent on the auto industry?
So, Jason, to be very clear, this is not a moment where it's my parents' Republican Party in the White House. This is Donald Trump's GOP. This is the MAGA party. And to me, that requires a new voice, a new leader who knows how to respond to this moment. I've made a name for myself, even in the minority here in the state Senate, of knowing how to leverage my platform, stand up, fight back, and help empower others to use their voice. We saw an example of this with Cory Booker, who took to the Senate floor, spoke for 25 hours, uplifting people's voices and concerns in a way that was really inspiring and showed you still have power when you're in the minority if you know how to use your platform.
You brought up the kind of the state of the Republican Party. Let's talk about the state of the Democratic Party, because a lot of people are pushing back on how Chuck Schumer is leading the Senate at this moment. What do you see as, I guess, kind of the mission statement of the Democratic Party going forward if you were to land in the Senate?
So that's exactly the problem. When I ask a lot of people what the Democratic Party stands for, they don't know. And that is something that I want to change from this campaign from right here in Michigan. As we see a moment where Donald Trump is slashing Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and stripping people's futures away from them, I want this campaign to be one about a new American dream, a way forward that says if you work hard enough, you should be able to afford the house that you want in the community that you want to live in, that you will be able to afford to start a family and save for retirement. And that is a very clear message that is a counter to Make America Great Again, because we know we cannot go backwards. We can't go to our past. We have to go forward, and we need a new voice to bring that out.
In your career, you've been an advocate for women's rights, for red flag laws when it comes to gun control. And you mentioned some of the things you want to make your campaign about. Are those certain things you want to fight for further in Washington as well?
Absolutely. I am the chair of the Senate Economic and Community Development Committee here in the state Senate. I've done a lot of work on reforming our state's approach to economic development to rely less on incentives and more on supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs and communities. So, yes, I want to do more work to end the epidemic of gun violence. I want to do more work to support working parents, work towards universal paid leave and childcare, and work towards an economic future that does not require us to go to the past or trying to hold on to minimum wage jobs that no longer exist.
Obviously, the first person in the race right now, but we expect more people down the road to get in. If How do you foresee the Democratic primary playing out if it is someone like Haley Stevens? And do you expect Governor Whitmer to endorse you as it goes forward?
Look, I'm going to run the race that we want to run. Within the first day, we had more than $1 million in donations, including from all 83 counties here in Michigan, with over 12,000 individual donors. That is a massive amount of support that shows that I am the right messenger and this is the right message. So we're going to get all across the state, regardless of who else gets into the race, to bring people into this mission, this campaign, and we'll see how the rest of it shakes out. But I was proud to be the first one out.
Some of your predecessors, like Debbie Stabenow, Gary Peters, Alyssa Slotkin, all served in the U.S. House before going to the Senate. What's your message to a voter out there who says, I just don't think she's ready to go from the State House to the U.S. Senate?
Look, this is also a state that sent Carl Levin to the US Senate from the Detroit City Council. There is a lot to be said about being on the ground in communities every day, working with the state budget, understanding our legislative process and what our state legislature is working on. We have a lot of success to build on in the legislature, and we need a real partner who understands that in the US Senate.
We still have all the better part of a year and a half before votes get cast here. What do you plan to do in the short term as when it comes to campaigning, or do you plan to ramp up as it goes? Are you in a fundraising kind of phase now, or are you also getting out there and visiting counties around the state?
We're on all of the above. I know that there are rallies all across the state this weekend organized by Indivisible. I will be out at least a couple of them, and then I will be heading up north to the rural caucus of the Democratic Party to have their meeting and starting to get around the state and meet as many people as possible. And I'm also incredibly active on social media, where every week I answer people's questions on what's going on, are we going to be okay, how do I contact my elected officials, and really making sure that no matter where you are and where I am, we can connect in real time. And I hope people will follow along.
Last thing, I'll let you go on this. I talked to Debbie Stabenow a while back after the announcement was made, and I said, has anybody reached out to you for advice or anything? She said, yeah, a few people have. I'm wondering if you're one of those folks, and what advice did you get?
I am. I reached out to Senator Stabenow very early when Senator Peters made his announcement, and she talked me through how big of a mission this is, and to take the time to build up a team before we launched, and that was great advice. So we took our time. I've got a great team. We had a great launch announcement, and I think we're off to the races.
State Senator Mallory McMorrow, we appreciate your time this morning. Good luck on the campaign. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jason.
Back here on Flashpoint to talk tariffs, specifically automotive and how it affects Michigan. To do that, we have Glenn Stevens Jr., Executive Director of Mich Auto, which is an automotive and mobility association. Dr. Jeff Reitmer is a supply chain professor at Wayne State University, and automotive analyst Sam Abul-Samad is the VP of Market Research at Telemetry. Guys, thanks for being here this morning. I know we could talk for days on this probably, but we're going to try and shoot for 10 minutes. Let me start. Jeff, we talked earlier this week, and I kind of want to talk basics a little bit just to start. If a tariff is a tax on imported goods by definition, and say, for example, Ford is importing a rear view mirror from Canada, and now it costs 25% more for that, who's going to pay for that, Canada or Ford?
Ford.
Ford's going
to pay for it.
Despite what the administration says that the countries will pay for it.
No, the countries, they don't have anything to do with it. It's whoever imports that part, they're going to pay for it.
Which leads to the next question. How does that not get passed on to the customer? And anybody can jump in here, but I know they're asking companies now not to pass that cost on. Do you see that not happening, Glenn?
They can do one of two things. They can absorb that cost, or they can pass it along. And in the case of the supply chain, as it stacks up in finished components to the assembly plant, the tariffs can stack up a lot. So it really is going to depend on what the companies decide to do, but ultimately the consumer will feel it.
And if they don't, the other question that popped in my mind this week, and Sam, I don't know if you want to try this one, if they don't pass it on in terms of price, doesn't a company automatically start looking for other ways to offset that cost?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most automakers at best have profit margins of maybe 6 to 8%, so they cannot absorb a 25% hit to their bottom line. And in fact, it's typically going to be more than that 25% because, as was mentioned, you get a stack up because a lot of parts cross the border multiple times.
Right.
It's estimated that many parts cross the border as much as 7 or 8 times during the production process, from raw materials to a finished vehicle. Every time you cross the border, and you've got retaliatory tariffs in Canada and Mexico now, you're adding on another percentage. So no, they cannot afford to absorb that 25%. It will, for the most part, get passed on to consumers. There are some exceptions, like the other day, Jose Munoz, the new CEO of Hyundai, said that they will not raise their prices, at least for now. But Hyundai's in kind of a unique position as being part of this enormous Korean conglomerate that has a lot of other businesses, and they can absorb some of that for probably longer than most standalone automakers can.
And if they don't do that, Jeff, doesn't that open the door for possibly laying people off? Or at least, at the very least, not hiring other people, even though we've heard this week Sean Fain is in favor of this because he's under the impression, hey, business will come back to America.
It's unrealistic to think in a supply chain that has taken 50, 60 years to evolve in what it is, that it's going to all come back to the United States. It's just not feasible in terms of cost and also in terms of labor. We have a serious lack of skilled labor in this country, and there's just not enough people to staff something like that.
And part of the reason why the system is set up the way it is now is because everybody's trying to optimize for cost, and as you said, this is going to raise costs. And if you localize production in the U.S., costs are going to go up anyway, regardless of whether you're paying tariffs or not. That's going to raise prices, and I've got a new forecast coming out that I estimate it's probably going to lead to a reduction of about 1.7, 1.8 million units annually in vehicle sales in the United States alone from the increased prices.
Glenn, Mish Auto wrote a letter to the Treasury Secretary, and you were asking them to pause the tariffs like they had been doing, at least on automobiles. Obviously, that didn't happen. Do you expect to be able to keep that communication open, or is it now the horse has left the barn?
No, the communication is constant from the suppliers, from the OEMs, from the trade associations, from our federal delegation. We need to get to a point where we're using the methodology that we had, and that's the USMCA agreement that was renegotiated from NAFTA under the first Trump administration. We'd like to see that reopen. It's important to keep this trade bloc together to be globally competitive, not to take it apart.
Yeah, and you pointed out, I believe in that letter, that 1 in 5 jobs in Michigan rely on the auto industry, which kind of means this could hurt. Michigan could be hurt more than any other state in the country.
There's no question, and we were talking about this earlier. There's also a multiplier effect, and this spreads into every community, including in the dealerships. So it's going to hurt Michigan. We're already feeling the pinch points right now, and our concern is for small suppliers and then all the way up to the showroom. If demand is decreased, that's going to have a backward pressure on the supply chain, and that means jobs too.
Sam, let me ask you, I'm going to take kind of the administration point of view here. They look at China, which put up roadblocks to our automakers to make it difficult to sell cars there. And we ended up, GM and other companies built companies there, even though I believe they lose money. Isn't that the expected outcome here, that those countries will build within the United States?
Ideally, that would be the case, that they will build here. And we see some of that. We've already seen that over the last 40 years of Japanese automakers, Korean automakers, Germans building factories here, and a significant number of the vehicles they sell here are produced here. But that's spread across North America because we've had NAFTA and USMCA. It's not just in the U.S. So it's going to be tough to, and with China in particular, because China is the country that's really coming on strong. They're the ones that we would need to attract to come here, and there's a lot of pushback against that. We've already seen that, for example, with battery companies, with pushback against companies like CATL and Gotion that wanted to build battery factories here. A lot of people don't want Chinese companies here.
And Jeff, it kind of goes back to what you said, the labor's not there. But in talking to you, you see sometimes what could be a worst case outcome, which is some bankruptcies from suppliers, and which could lead to a recession and possibly a depression.
Yeah, especially the lower level suppliers, they're operating on really thin margins. And changes in the cost structure really hit them first. And I know in 2007, 2008, you had some of those suppliers, they didn't declare bankruptcy, they just went out of business, closed their doors, and that was it. And then production picks back up, and you go place orders, and that supplier you had's not there.
Yeah.
So now it's that cycle of, okay, I got to find a new supplier, I got to get them certified, and that takes time, it takes money.
Let me ask everybody.
One more important detail on the suppliers, that with the tariffs, that when parts come across the border, the suppliers have to pay the tariffs within 5 days. But they don't get paid by the OEM or the next level supplier that they're providing parts to for 60, 90, 120 days. So that poses a real cash flow problems for those smaller companies.
Interesting. I want to kind of ask everybody if do you see companies, because we know they can't pivot on a dime, they're huge companies, but could they just try and wait out this presidency? If it is his final presidency, that's a whole nother discussion. But could they just play the waiting game here, go 4 corners, and wait for the next 4 years to run out?
Well, those are the decisions they're making right now. Do we want to see more manufacturing jobs in Michigan? Absolutely. Do we want to see more UAW jobs? The UAW helped build this industry and helped build this state, but we have to be globally competitive too. So we have 12 assembly plants in Michigan. They're already here. One's being retooled in Orion Township right now. But to change things, build new plants takes years, even to change components from one line to another that are processes. So we need a methodology. We need to keep the trade bloc intact.
Yeah, and then of course a Democrat could win and reverse everything.
Yeah,
Jeff, in 4 years.
And that's, supply chains hate uncertainty. And that's what we have. It's like, just tell me what you want and let me plan for that. It's this moving target that is making things so difficult for the auto suppliers.
There's another important risk for the auto industry as well in the U.S., which is because of other policy changes from the administration with rolling back fuel economy and emission standards. They essentially, if the U.S.-based auto industry goes and reverts back, pulls back from electrification, they become even less competitive globally. And the rest of the world is not changing those policies. They're pushing ahead with electrification and software-defined vehicles. And with these additional costs that the industry faces, that's less that they can invest into R&D for innovation. So the U.S. industry becomes more and more isolated and will not be able to compete globally, whereas the Chinese are pushing very hard globally.
I just want to
20 seconds.
underscore that.
Yeah.
I mean, the competition is not Canada. The competition is not Mexico. The competition globally is for us to be as efficient as possible, low cost, high quality. Automation's going to play a role. The Chinese auto industry is expanding, and we have to be very careful about that. If we disengage and take apart our supply chains, we're not doing that.
Yeah. Guys, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much. It's an intriguing conversation, I know, and we're going to talk more about it in the coming months and years for sure. We're going to talk finances right after this. Good stuff, guys. Thank you very much. Four things could easily be 40 things this week when talking about what to do and not do when it comes to your retirement funds, your 401k, and your investments. The market has been incredibly volatile this week in the wake of the more tariff talk we get. So I reached out to certified financial planner and former business editor right here at Local 4, Rod Maloney, for 4 pieces of advice, and he delivered. First and foremost, do not panic. Second, do your annual check on diversification, meaning don't be in one sector, be in many. Third, to use a baseball analogy here, where are you on the base paths? Are you rounding third and headed home, i.e. hitting retirement? Well, the closer you are to retirement, the less risk you should take on. A 60-40 percentage split of stocks versus bonds is a pretty good start there. Mutual funds and exchange-traded funds are also usually less volatile than stocks. Finally, if you haven't already, spend the money and make a plan with a real financial planner. Rod says, yeah, it may cost you $1,500, but, and I can hear him saying this part, it's better than going insolvent. Back to you. If you want to join the conversation, we miss Rod so much around here, don't we? Hit me up on the socials if you want, or you can always get me with an email, flashpoint@clickondetroit.com. I'm Jason Colthorpe. We'll see you later.